Mrs. Matlack?
Here.
Mrs. Neary?
Here.
Mr. Rossi?
Here.
Mrs. Seidel?
Here.
Mrs. Scarpolino?
Here.
Mrs. Schultz?
Here.
Mrs. Tong?
Here.
Dr. Wong?
Here.
Mr. Goodwin?
Here. Welcome everyone to the January 8th, 2019 board meeting work session. We're going to first start off with correspondence. I believe Mrs. Matlack has some. I'm not sure who else.
Yes. I'm not sure this is on, but okay. Okay, very good. So I just have one thing to report. The board was invited to go to Mrs. Roscoff's English 4 class if we had the opportunity to do so. Her class each year presents their persuasive essays, and so I was able to do that. I was able to go to the morning and the afternoon class, and the students presented as a group and did research as a group and presented. One class presented about open campus for lunch, and the other group presented about the seniors having the ability to leave campus for lunch. So they also asked me questions about, board policy and what they would need to do in order to make those things happen. So I received 2 lovely thank you notes today from the students for being there, and one of them said that she is going to follow up on that with the board. So we may be seeing our students here to talk to us about what they researched on their essays.
Thank you. Any other correspondence? Okay. If not, we're going to go into our first public comment session. There's going to be 2 opportunities for a public comment during this evening. The first public comment will be on the action agenda items only. There will be another public comment section for any topic at the end of the meeting. If you would like to speak now, please identify the agenda item, speak into the microphone, and clearly state your name and address. Each speaker will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. The timer light will be green at the beginning of the 3 minutes. When the timer turns yellow, there will be 30 seconds left. When the timer turns red, your time's up. Please conclude your comments. The Board of Education meeting are held publicly to permit the public to observe the board's conduct at its business. Observe the board's it says conduct of its business. The meeting the meetings follow a consistent format and structure, and the agendas are posted on the district website prior to each meeting. Board members only have authority when present at a Board of Education meeting. These meetings are the only times when all 9 board members are together and able to conduct board business. Cherry Hill Board of Education meetings provide 2 opportunities for public comment, 1 opportunity prior to the action portion of the meeting, at which time the community members may make a comment of any item that will be acted on by the board during the meeting. The one at the end of the meeting, after the board has completed its agenda items, at which the time the community members may make comment on any item they wish. This structure serves the needs of the board to effectively and efficiently conduct its business and its members to interact with one another while providing opportunity for the public to make comments. So, in other words, what we're asking for today in each meeting, the first public comment section is really for only items that are actually going to be acted on during the meeting. The second public comment section is for any item you'd like to comment on. So with that being said, are there any comments on any items on the action agenda. Please state that item along with your name and address.
Is this on? Can you hear?
Yes.
Andy McIlvain, 23 Jade Lane. I have a couple of questions about two separate items on the agenda. The first is the board secretary's report and the under business and facilities and the bill list specifically. And the second is about the discussion that you're going to have under strategic planning. And if I may I want to ask two questions and more question than comment. First comment, yeah.
Just to clarify, only the items on the action agenda. So
yeah,
for the work
well,
session.
bill list is, but if you'll just bear with me for a second. I made the recommendation at the last meeting for the establishment of a bond projects committee, and I at that time I suggested that it should operate under the B&F committee, and I wanted to revise that comment and that advice to under the strategic planning committee.
Well, you can comment on that at the end.
But there's a question here. Okay. For the board attorney, or just in terms of procedure, should the board decide to talk about it tonight and actually set up the committee, what would the voting setup to be, Mr. Green, for voting and approving a subcommittee on the strategic planning? And then I'll hold that question. Second question is about the bill list. I noticed that there is no bill list available to the public. And it brought up the question in my mind of what constitutes public information when that public information is available and when it's appropriate for the board to share or the administration to share public information with the public. Mr. Green.
Yes. Well, okay.
It's not normal. The law is clear that the bill list is available for inspection at the board offices and may be requested. There was a ruling at one point that got reversed, which said that boards of education had to include all of the items in support of the agenda. With the agenda, that was overturned. That is not required to be put out in public ahead of time, but it is public information. It can be requested and inspected at the board offices.
Approved by the board?
It can also actually be seen ahead of time, the bill list, before it's approved by the board. In terms of creation of a committee, a board is always free to create a special committee at any time by its vote. And at that point, the president typically would then appoint the members.
Would it require 9 votes or just an assent? Yeah.
It would just be a majority of those present. But that's a discussion item that we get into later.
Thank you.
Any comments on any action item agendas? Okay, if not, we're going to move into our action agenda now. Since we do not have any items under curriculum and instruction, I'm going to go ahead and move the items under B&F committee for tonight. And the superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, financial reports, and number 2, the superintendent. Oh, that's just one item. Okay. Do I have a second? Mrs. Schultz. Any questions? Okay. If not, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Neary,
Abstain.
Mr. Rossi,
Abstain.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
I need to abstain to Beata Home Health on the bill list. Yes to the rest.
Mrs. Tong,
I'm going to abstain.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Next on the agenda, I'm going to ask, if I can find the agenda here, Mrs. Schultz to move the action items for HR.
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointments certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, assignment salary change non-certificated. Number 6, other compensation certificated. And we have a pink sheet, which is in addition to item 4, appointments non-certificated. Do I have a second? Mrs. Seidel, are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Sugars?
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Neary,
Abstain.
Mr. Rossi,
Abstain. It was prior to my term.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Tong,
Abstain.
Dr. Wong,
I'll abstain item 3 involving Rowan University, and yes to the remainder.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Next, we're going to ask Mrs. Scarpellino to move the P&L items.
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying investigation decisions. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Neary,
Abstain.
Mr. Rossi,
Abstain.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mrs. Tong,
Abstain.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. And we do not have any action items for strategic planning, so we're going to go ahead and move over to the board work session, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Seidel to go through curriculum and instruction.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. The last Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting was held on January 2nd at 7 p.m. And as you know, we're taking our committee meetings on the road, so it was held at Kingston Elementary School. As usual, we had a packed agenda. The first item I want to talk about tonight is Miss Corona and Miss McCartney shared information on a presentation that they conducted at the National Council of Teachers of English. The presentation was entitled Perspective of a Warrior, Encouraging Courageous Conversations in Middle School ELA Classrooms. Their presentation showcased a critical literacy overview through content, culture, and culminating activities. And I'm going to just send around this white paper if anybody's interested in more details on that, because it was great. I would be remiss if I didn't share how impressive this accomplishment was. We're very proud that Cherry Hill School District was represented. The NCTE conference, which was held in Houston this year, is the largest professional group for education, and the conference had over 10,000 attendees. So, and I believe, and Dr. Mahan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they were selected out of 5,000 presentations that were up to be presented. So quite an accomplishment. So we'd like to thank Ms. Corona and Ms. McCartney for their work on this. So some pretty exciting stuff. Next up, we talked about the next steps for our Chinese World Language class, planning to roll out Chinese Level 2 starting in the 2019-2020 school year has occurred. We can anticipate a job posting in February, which is next month. And just some additional details that were discussed at the meeting. We currently have 104 students enrolled in Chinese 1 at East and 35 at West. The district will be looking for a strong candidate to fill this position, as they will look to this candidate to assist in the curriculum writing process for Chinese 2. And then we'll also continue our partnership with Rutgers University to help identify qualified individuals, which is something we did the first time around when we rolled out Chinese last year. Next, we had a district technology update. You received these documents in your Friday night packet, so you should be familiar with some of this. Mr. Plavinsky and Dr. Mahan shared the Technology Initiative Educational Rationale White Paper and also a 5-year technology purchase plan to support technology enhancements district-wide. Mr. Plavinsky and Dr. Mahan shared the educational rationale and our 5-year I already said that. But they shared this purchase plan to support technology enhancements district-wide, and they really wanted to stress that technology is not just Chromebooks. We talk about Chromebooks a lot and one-to-one initiatives, but it's more than that. We had an opportunity to discuss some infrastructure enhancements, uses for interactive flat panels, formerly known as smart boards, and virtual reality tools that can be used for STEM projects. An example would be utilizing something called Little Bits, which are electronic building blocks used in creative and fun ways to integrate coding into the curriculum. There also was another example, which I think is really cool, called Sphero Balls, which is a spherical robot capable of rolling around and can be controlled by a smartphone or a tablet to creatively bring coding and programming into the classrooms. So we talked about some really exciting stuff. We also covered the list of technology initiatives that were accomplished in 2017 and 2018, like replacement routers at Cooper Hart, Johnson Kilmer, and Kingston, and online registration for kindergarten and new students. To accomplishments in this current school year, like additional district internet bandwidth and the anticipated completion of our application for Future Ready Schools in July of 2019. Again, I mentioned that the 5-year plan that was shared in the Friday night memo with you guys makes recommendations for purchase over the next 5 years, including this year. The 2018-2019 year 1 purchases are already in the works, and we are using the additional funding that we received in 2018 for those purchases. We can expect to continue to receive updates on these initiatives at future CNI meetings. Next, we had an update on a musical that will be happening at West. The West Circle Club, under the direction of Carol Roscoff, will present a musical, The Emperor's New Clothes, on May 11th at 7 p.m. Kids are really looking forward to the show. More details will be coming on this show in the Friday night packet as we get closer to the date in the spring. We spent quite a bit of time on some family life curriculum follow-up. Based on feedback from the previous curriculum and instruction meeting in December, the Family Life Curriculum Parent Letter has been revised and will be distributed to all families at the elementary schools. The letter includes how to access Rubicon Atlas, who will be teaching each unit, the timeline topics, and the progress indicators by strand. And just some additional information that was discussed. The Family Life Curriculum is mandated by the New Jersey Department of Ed. We've been, as a board and district, having conversations about the Family Life Curriculum in CNI since at least 2016, where we work to create consistency in the deployment of the curriculum across the district. Last month, as I mentioned at CNI, the community shared some concerns. After reviewing the concerns and feedback, we believe this revised letter and the associated changes to the curriculum, for example, revised Strand B to be in gender-specific groups and removing the diagramming requirement from the 2nd grade levels, we were able to address many parent concerns. Once the letter goes out, the district will wait a relatively short period of time. I believe we said 2 weeks, and then we'll be able to give the teachers the green light to resume the family life instruction. Next up, we talked about the release of the Genesis Parent Portal at the elementary schools and electronic report cards and interims for the middle and high schools. So for the middle and high schools, report cards and interims will be electronic starting the 2nd marking period, and a letter will be sent home letting all parents know that this is happening. For the elementary schools, parent portal information will be shared in the spring of 2019 to ensure all parents have access, and this will set the stage for online report cards and interims during the 2019-2020 school year. So as we continue to have all these discussions about moving forward with technology initiatives, we're also encouraging our parents to move into the future as well with respect to technology. So this information about how we're moving forward with these items in Genesis will also obviously be shared with the parents, but will also be shared with zone, PTA, middle, and high school PTAs to get the word out to as many people as possible. Next up, we talked about Parcc Testing schedule and assessment calendar. So the following testing calendars will be posted on the district website, I'm assuming after this evening. It will be the fall Parcc Testing schedule, the NJ, SLS, ELA, math, science schedule, and then the all assessment schedule. And just a little more detail about some of these items. The first item, the fall Parcc Testing schedule, is the final high school testing schedule for kids who didn't pass Parcc previously. Although there's been a lot of discussion recently about Parcc and graduation requirements, we as a district right now are in stay put mode. There is and we'll move forward as planned until sort of that 30-day hold period is over. So our strategy isn't changing as of yet. I'm sure we'll have additional discussions in the future about that. We also, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that Parcc has a new name. It's now referred to as the NJ, New Jersey Student Learning Assessment, so NJSLA. So we reviewed that spring schedule, and I just want to point out that due to, again, going back to technology, due to some great technology planning, the high school testing is down to 2 days for that. So that, you know, for those of you that have been on the board for a long time, that is a huge, huge win. So that's great news. And then finally, the 2018-2019 full assessment calendar was shared with C&I and now the full board, and will be posted on the website shortly. All of these documents were in your Friday night packet, so you should have them. So Dr. Smith was kind enough to share an article called Making History Majors Modern. It was regarding elective offerings, and this was shared as a follow-up to previous C&I discussions in the previous 2 months about electives. And Dr. Smith indicated that a next step is to start to meet with high school teams to talk about the course of study guide and work to help students plan in advance for courses they want to take. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you very much. Sorry, C&I is always very busy. The next 3 items I'm going to lump together. We talked about the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT, college essay summer classes, as well as the summer music program and summer enrichment classes. A memo was shared with us from Bonnie Minjin, which outlined all of those upcoming programs. And that information will be shared with parents in the very near future because we like to make sure they get the information out in a timely manner so they can plan for their summers. And the one change I just wanted to highlight is that we did remove the ACT piece from the PSAT, SAT, college essay summer classes just because of a extremely low enrollment, which we discussed was a bit surprising considering the popularity of the ACT is on the rise, but we just didn't have the enrollment to support that. So again, and then let's make sure. Another article that was shared with us by Dr. Smith was from the Harvard Graduate School of Education resource, How Parents Can Create a Nightly Homework Ritual That Works for Everybody. So again, thank you for sharing that with us. It was very informative. And the last thing that we talked about before I get into the public comment, we spoke about the high school's course of study booklet, which we've talked about for the past few months in C&I, and we will get additional updates in February. The The booklets will be available electronically and will be more user-friendly, which is great for everybody. The booklet will be posted after the high school information nights are presented at each middle school, which I believe are happening this week or next week? Both. Okay, great. So the COS booklet will be posted within a couple weeks. And again, we'll be talking about the course of study booklet again in February. So we did have a fair amount of public comment. So I will just share with you some of the general themes that were discussed. We had some community members who shared with us that they didn't personally receive, or they knew someone who didn't receive a letter about the family life curriculum. There were several community members who relayed that they're in support of using anatomically correct terms in the family life curriculum. We also had several community members that appreciated the district's response to their concerns and feedback that were brought to the table from the previous meeting. And then several community members had feedback and suggestions for additional ways to engage parents who have concerns about the family life curriculum. For example, holding evening events for those who opt their children out of participating during the school day. We had a follow-up question about how this content will be delivered to students with special needs. And we had a comment regarding electronic report cards and looking into the need to sign for a sign-off for parents, similar to how elementary parents sign off and middle school parents sign off on the report card today. And then finally, there was a recommendation for us to possibly expand Genesis use and look into putting the course selection online, which is something the district is already looking into. So that's really exciting. And that's it. I know that was a lot. Thank you, as usual, for your patience. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Neary.
For the online report cards, how are we handling that for the parents who don't and the families that don't have access to technology to receive those?
I'm going to let Dr. Mahan take that because there is a plan.
So we're going to use the same plan that we used when we distributed Parcc score reports at the beginning of this year. We send a letter out explaining we're moving to an electronic process. If you do not have access to technology, you can request a hard copy through your building principal or guidance counselor. In addition to that, before we decided to make the move to electronic-based report cards, we did a run or a report to see how many of our parents are actually accessing the parent portal to receive information to ensure that we had high numbers. We were over 95% of our parent population accessing the system to receive information. So we were pretty confident that the majority of our parents do have access to the technology.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I do. That was actually my last committee meeting before coming onto this side, and it was long. Very detailed notes, I will say. I was there, so these were very detailed and helpful. One question. You did mention that there was a comment from a community member regarding how this curriculum or how the program that was adopted will be either adjusted or looked at for our students that have special needs. Can you comment any further on that?
I cannot. I don't know if Dr. Malash has anything to add there, or I believe there will be some follow-up, or Dr. Mahan.
So as always with all of our curriculum, we make sure that it is age and developmentally appropriate for the students who are receiving it. So for students in special education classes, self-contained classes, that will also be the case. We rely heavily on our school nurses who will be delivering the content, as well as the PE and health teachers, to work in coordination with the teachers to ensure that the content is delivered in an appropriate fashion. So just like with our general curriculum for math or ELA or social studies, humanities, we expect that items will be modified to meet the needs of our students.
Thank you, Dr. Mahan. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, back to you, Mr. Goodwin.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. So for B&F, I'm going to go ahead and go through that. We had a good meeting. We met on Thursday right before the board reorganization meeting, and we basically had an update on the various projects going on throughout the district. And I'm going to go through those projects that we got updates on. The first one is the East Roof project, the roof over the auditorium. That project has been completed. The generator at High School East was successfully replaced with an outdoor generator, and the existing generator that was enclosed has been removed. The project to repair and or replace the walls that house that generator is still underway. Transformer. I keep saying generator. So it's actually a transformer that was removed. So the work at East on the wall around the auditorium, there's still investigation going on, trying to understand the extent of the damage, and there will be remediation on that work coming soon. The work on the security vestibules at Woodcrest as well as Payne schools is underway and is expected to be completed by spring break. Duct work at Barclay has been completed. The work to install security cameras and badge access at High School East and High School West is still underway and is expected to be completed next month. And those were the items we got updates on, and we did have one member from the public, Mr. McVeigh. He presented us with a proposal around a joint committee that would include board and community members, and that is something that will be discussed as far as moving forward with the new bond. And those were the main items we discussed on last Thursday. Any questions? Okay. If not, that's B and F. And now I'm going to ask Mrs. Schultz if there's any items for HR.
Well, the HR meeting was going to be held on January 3rd, but it was canceled.
Oh, okay.
Due to the board reorg, but we are planning on to meet February the 5th, and it will be at Carusi Middle School.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
All right.
And next we have our P&L, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Scarpolino for any updates on P&L.
So the Policy and Legislation Committee met on Tuesday, January 2nd, also at Kingston Elementary School in the Media Center. We had, for discussion information, we went over the district regulations, starting with a review of the 5000 series. Regulations are the current names, but they used to be formally called procedures. So we've done all the policies, and they're up on the website, and now we're in the process of reviewing the regulations. Dr. Smith shared the process for reviewing the 5000 regulations. There's a committee that's been formed with high school administrators and central administration people. Goals were set, shared review documents were created, future meeting dates were established, and the review process began. It's going to be a lengthy process, as multiple administrators and departments will need to be involved in the reviews. 3 areas were discussed at the initial meeting: attendance, class rate, transcripts, and promotion and retention. A key piece of the work will be to ensure that all district documents are references to policy or regulation are consistent. One board member had offered suggestions for language and punctuation to improve clarity, and another board member asked questions about particular regulations. But for the most part, we were just discussing sort of what the review process is going to be, an initial sort of looking at them. I had reviewed a lot of the policies because I actually like doing that, like most people. And we were talking about the need to just make sure the language is consistent, not only within the regulations, but that they're consistent with the policies that are already up. And so that's part of what slows down the process. But luckily, I like doing it, even though probably most other people don't. We didn't have any policies for first reading or second reading. We did have some public comment. One community member asked about a topic from the last meeting because there wasn't enough time because we always have C&I coming right in behind us. And that question was about what would happen if a snow day caused an in-service day to become a full day of school in relation to changing the calendar so that we we were acknowledging like the Lunar New Year or Diwali on in-service days and what would take place then. And Dr. Malash had indicated that that would be a factor that we'd have to take a look at and figure out as we move forward on this. So it was a good question. It wasn't something I had thought of before. And also, one of the committee members asked how a concern about a particular policy. If a community member or a parent had a concern about a particular policy as it affected them or their child, what would be the process for sharing that concern? And again, Dr. Malash indicated that it would be good to start, as always, with the building administration to see if the concern could be rectified there. And if not, then again, moving through the chain of command. But when it had to do with a specific regulation or policy affecting an individual, that's the best way to start. If you have a question sort of generally about policies, then probably starting with either coming to P&L or sending an email to Dr. Smith is probably a good way if it's just generally a question about a policy or regulation. And that is about it. Any questions? Oh, Mrs. Seidel.
Is the plan to dole out the regulations among the committee like we did for the policies where, for example, if it's a policy that if it's a regulation related to something that might impact curriculum and instruction, the committee will be reviewing them like we did for policies?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scarpellino. Next, we have strategic planning, and I'm going to turn it to Mrs. Matlack to bring out those topics.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everyone. The bond referendum is listed as a discussion item for this evening under Strategic Planning Committee. Last month, at our December 18th board meeting, we discussed our options for moving forward in regard to the bond. At that meeting, the board was in consensus on developing a new referendum with a future date. We also agreed we needed to bring the community in on the discussion in a more formal way. With our direction clear, the board agreed to table the in-depth discussion until the new year. Well, this is our first meeting of the new year, so here we are. Administration has shared with us, the board members, a hard copy of a proposed timeline, and board members, you received an email last night from Dr. Malash with an electronic copy of that timeline. So that will be part of our discussion as well. As this will be a full board discussion and not just a committee report, as is typical during a work session, I'll now turn the meeting back to Mr. Goodwin, our board president, to lead us in the next steps of the bond discussion. Mr. Goodwin.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. So, as Mrs. Matlack indicated, all the board members should have received both a soft copy as well as a hard copy of a recommendation from administration. Number one, it identifies just a timeline in terms of where we need to go as far as the bond referendum, and then some recommended steps that go along the way to hit that timeline. And the idea is that we're right now targeting September of 2020 to have go back out with the bond. That will give us not only the time to discuss and make sure we get the items on the bond right to the best of our ability and with all the work, including with the community, but also the time for the state to go through its review, and then also to provide feedback, and then time for us to do the necessary steps in order to have the bond questions, etc., published and out there, as well as communicating that out to the public. So I want to start off with the opportunity for each, well, actually I want to start off with a short discussion just in terms of if there's any questions on the timeline or why the timeline is what it is. And once we complete that, I would then like to go through starting with discussing the idea of board input and community input, which are the first couple of bullets under the January and February of 2019 in that. So I want to open it up. First of all, if there's questions that anyone has regarding the timeline. Ms. Matlack.
I would just like to ask if Dr. Malash or Mrs. Sugars could just, you know, explain. I know everybody has seen this, but there is an extended time frame that is built into this calendar for the state review. So I was just wondering if you could, one of you could just, you know, explain that because of what happened the last time, which is lengthening the process here a bit.
So as you recall, last year we approved our project applications at the end of March, which we had been told would be plenty of time for an September, at the time we thought it was in September, bond referendum. And as you know, it was not. We had anticipated that we would receive our approvals around July 4th, submitted April 4th, and 90 days from that is July 4th. We actually received our approvals on August 17th. So in order to make sure that we don't run into that situation again, we felt it would be prudent to build some extra time into the timeline. And that would mean that actually we would be looking at approving project applications about this time next year. That would give us 2 more months than we had last time, and then would hopefully ensure that we would have approvals in time for a September bond referendum.
Thank you. Because there's also actual work once the letters come in on the administration part in order to get this ready.
There's a lot of work once the letters come in. There's also a lot of work leading up to getting the applications submitted. So we also want to make sure that we allot enough time for our architect to make sure that we have enough time to get the project applications together.
Okay. And so all to our advantage if things go smoothly this time from the state's end.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. Now, did you want to talk about this before we? Okay, all right. So I want to throw this open to anyone who has questions on the timeline. First of all,
well, I have just a small question about. I understand this is the targeting date in September, but how fixed it is? I mean, what's the particular reason to target it in September? You know, rather than say in November with the general election.
So our recommendation administratively is still to have this on a separate date so people literally focus on just this. November 2020 is going to be a lot going on Election Day in November. It's a presidential election. We do not want the work to be lost. You know, and leading up to the vote on December 11th, we said all along over the couple of years, we want people to focus on it and talking just about this. So that still takes us where it is. We believe that September of 2020 is the earliest date that we can be prepared effectively with a new referendum to do that. So that takes us where it is.
I have some questions regarding the timeline as well. Given the fact that 2020 might have historic turnouts at the polls, there may be a way of looking at capitalizing on that and saying the vast majority or more than have come out from our community before may be able to capitalize on that and really put a bond out that a lot of people will come out to vote for if the process is done right. So, I mean, obviously it's a long way away. We don't know what else may be on there from a state referendum standpoint, and we don't actually know the date. But that could be something to consider if that date of fall of 2020 stands. And are we to assume, since we're skipping a year, that it's projected to be another large bond of large proportion, or during the discussions we'll determine that?
We, as a board, working with the community, will determine what's going to be in that bond. So.
All right.
Oh, sorry. To Mr. Rossi's question, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when we were having these discussions about when to hold the election, that there was some historical data that was shared about folks who skip things like bond referendum questions during general elections. If I'm correct in that and anybody has that information, great. If not, I just seem to remember hearing some statistics about how that, and I hear you regarding, assuming that there'll be historic numbers in 2020, but I do believe that there was also some statistics that sort of supported our decision in the past. And so if I'm remembering that correctly and there is that information, even if not tonight, can we get that information as a follow-up? Thank you.
Ms. Zaneri?
So I think it's great that we have a target date to work towards and a goal so it doesn't slip past us. But I think my bigger concern would be the what. What does the bond look like? So we're talking about, times for project applications, but we're not sure what that should be based on the last election. So
yeah, well, that's going to come.
The next 6 months are what concerns me. Getting the community input, being very aggressive in what do they want.
Right. And we're going to start that discussion even tonight. So
okay, thank you.
I looked at this timeline and I said, whoa, it's way out there. But I just wanted to kind of throw it out there for people to comment on that. Any other questions on that?
I do have another one on has it been looked at? Has the administration looked at, a lot of the work, a lot of the project work has been ferreted out and looked at already with the previous bond. And I know there's the 3-month and the time frame based upon when the applications have to go in and the 90-day waiting period from the state. Have we ruled out completely putting something together that would have the security needs in it as well as some high priority infrastructure needs that we might be able to put at the end of 2018? Because understanding during the previous bond there was an awful lot of talk about how necessary these things and had to have happened because there was a lot of urgency in a number of them. So has that been looked at from the administration?
So as we looked at the time frame, right, and as Mr. Sugars went through, in March of 2018 is when the board adopted the project, certified the projects to be submitted to the state. And if we use the same time frame, and that took us to a December election date of 2018, you're literally talking about the work all needs to be done 7 weeks from now. Do we believe that effectively we can take the steps that we believe need to be done with engagement and have everything ready in 7 weeks? No, we do not.
The math then, if you say for 7 weeks, that gives us what?
So if you use the 90 days, if the state stays within their statutory requirement, which they did not, and I wish I could say that I could control the Department of Ed and the state government and how they operate. I cannot. We're looking at the most recent experience that we had going through this process. Like I said, the most recent experience that we had was in March of 2018. The board adopted and we submitted April 4th. Which, like I say, literally takes us that in the next 7 weeks, everything that we're talking about that needs to be done would need to be done in order for us, if we follow that same time frame, to go out for vote again in December of 2019. We don't believe that effectively, based on the feedback that we received, the discussions that we've had, the discussion that took place at the December 18th board meeting, that is realistic for us to do and be authentic in taking all these additional steps.
So regarding any emergent or urgent issues, we had previously talked about that if the bond were to not move forward, that any emergent issues would have to be taken care of through the general budget. And so I'm assuming that we're staying the course with that, correct?
We are trying to. I mean, we have fortunately a healthy capital reserve account, but our funds far exceed what I would consider urgent. So, you know, we've been having lots of conversations as we're preparing budget for next year and determining what to take out of that capital reserve account when we're faced with projects like the parapet wall, which we don't have a number on yet. We're looking at roofs. Roofs and building envelope will be our priority as we go into budget next year to determine what projects to do. But certainly I would tell you that our list is much longer than our funds will accommodate.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on the timeline? So, okay. Go ahead.
So I would like to know why is the election held on September, on December, or November? Like, why do we pick a date, or can we pick any particular date to decide to vote?
The state sets, there are 5 dates that the state sets in terms of being able to do the elections. There's a September date, there's a November in the general election, there's a December date, there's a January date, and there's a March date that you can go out for referendum. That's a statutory that the state provides. So we don't make the determination about when they fall during the year. We just get to make the determination, and ultimately the board gets to adopt the date, but the dates are provided.
If that's the case, can we have the bond or I guess whatever we need to have, the building or repair, whatever, can we move it to January, March, and then maybe start working on it now for the following year?
So as we look at the project, right, so this is an outside piece. To do a referendum requires us to prepare project specifications and applications that must be submitted to the Department of Ed. The Department of Ed then reviews them, identifies what's reimbursable, what are educational expenses, and that process to go through before we go out to the community and ask the community to vote on whether or not they believe that we should borrow the money to do that work. As I said, the earliest that we believe we can have that done is by January of next year in order to submit those applications, to take the steps that we need to take to do to address all the needs that exist within the district.
Ms. Neary.
Is it possible, sorry, Sally, as Lisa had asked, to see if those statistics are available so we could review them, or the public could, on the voting date?
On the voting dates?
Yeah, the historical data around voter turnout.
Is that?
Yeah, if we have something, we'll find what we have. Absolutely.
Thank you.
What I heard may have been anecdotal as well, so I'm not 100% sure that there was data. I just seem to recall that we had some discussion around that in strategic planning.
Yeah, I will take a look at it. I don't recall specific statistics, Ms. Sugars.
I think anecdotally, as you said, it is believed that September is the most successful date in terms of the other dates that are available to have referendums. It tends to be the more successful date, but I don't know if there's actual statistics, but we can certainly see what we can find.
Lynn, just a question. So it looks like we got to pick the date, the end date that we're going to vote on, and obviously we're going to work backwards from that. So in your opinion, when do we need to pick that date as a board so that we can start the work and the discussion and picking the community meetings and everything and all of the work? Because we can talk about, this discussion about when we're going to vote on the bond could take months, and we could be missing the real conversations that we need to be having, which is, are we going to form committees? What's the community input? So I guess, in your opinion, how much time do we have to select the date of the bond so that we can move the conversation from when's the date to how do we get it done? Because for those of us who have been through this, there is a lot of work that we need to get done, which the conversation should be beyond the date of September 29th.
I would say that you probably need to decide by either the next board meeting or the early February board meeting.
Fair enough, thank you.
You know, and Ms. Schultz, just to add on it, there's a safety in structure, right? Structure gives us something that we're working towards. You know, as we talked about leading up to the referendum, we can discuss and admire the problems that exist, you know, and talk about when to do it, as the discussions existed, you know, beginning literally in April of 1999 after the last referendum was adopted. You know, which is, it'll be 20 years a couple of months from now that the discussions have taken place. I agree with Lynn. Yeah, the sooner, if not at the end of the month, then in February.
So do we immediately follow that up with, how do we start to engage the community so we can determine the what, or we're not going to have much to do on the day to vote?
Well, actually, I probably should have been clear. I wanted to talk about the timeline and see if anyone had concerns about that, but actually we will begin discussions, and I want to focus in on under the January and February timeline or dates. I want to focus in specifically on board input and community input, and I would like to really kind of get feedback from the board on those items tonight. And if we can come to consensus on those items, that would be ideal. But that's one of the things I want to focus on tonight. And then we also, moving forward in future meetings, we will focus on staff input and student input. So as far as moving, I guess the first piece is I want to kind of see if we have a consensus or at least some agreement that we're okay with these dates right now. So, yes.
I'm okay with those dates.
Okay, all right.
If you're taking a straw poll, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, if we had a straw poll, is there anyone who's against these dates? Or is anyone against the dates?
You mean the particular date on September 29th?
Right.
I have some concerns.
Okay. Okay.
Me too.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we have some that have concerns about those dates, and what about the remaining folks? So I see 3 people that have concerns in general.
No, I have no concerns after having gone through the process. I think this is a reasonable time frame, and I think building in the bit of extra time, allowing for the state approvals, is wise to do. And if we should get them back sooner, then that allows us more time to educate the community on going forward. I think this is a reasonable time frame.
Okay.
I agree. I don't have a problem with the time frame given what we've just went through with the last bond. I think it's reasonable.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with it.
Okay. So we'll put a pin in this right now in terms of that date, and we'll it's not etched in stone right now, but we'll at least have something to work towards. And what I do want to do specifically, and I want to give each board member an opportunity to provide input and feedback regarding the first 2 items in January. The first item being board input. What does it entail through committee structure, through board discussion, and then also the second item being community input. What does it entail? Surveys, forums, and I just want to have each person speak on this item. And I would like to have it have an opportunity, everyone to have an opportunity to speak. So I'm thinking maybe if we start over with Mrs. Neary and just work our way around and so that each person can give input, and specifically on the items regarding board input and community input, and what does that look like moving forward with the bond?
Okay, thanks. So for board input, I'd like to see it as the board as a whole versus just a smaller group and then bringing it back. I think a bond of this size and nature, I think it should be discussed as a whole. I think that's important. As far as community input, what does that look like? I think to start, start with some small surveys. Let's find out what they want. I know we had coffees and conversations and, trying to get people out, but I think they want to be heard, so we've got to find a way to have them heard. Social media, whether we, good, bad, indifferent, like it, hate it, that's where people are conversing. So all you have to do is not even comment. You can just observe what they're saying, and you're starting to feel a sense of the input of what they're looking for. I'm not saying that's the only place you have it. I'm not saying that is the place you have it, but just start reading what people are saying and understanding. I think surveys help. I don't know that any of it's an all or nothing approach. I think you have to do some of all of it and understand, what do they want? We know the buildings need repairs. If you go in any one of them, it's pretty painfully obvious. So, but do they want all 19 buildings? How do we have that conversation? Invite them out, send it home, send the information in the email, talk about it in the weekly email every week. I know there was a lot of that at the end, but invite them to come out. We'll put it on each agenda. I will comment earlier so that when they come out, they can come out and comment earlier in the evening, something that gets them here talking about it. Thank you.
What about the last item there that says the idea around a formal ad hoc committee that includes a board and the board members as well as community under the community input?
So I want to be careful when we're saying ad hoc committee. What type of committee are we talking about? Is it going to be just a committee to get input and understand what the community is looking for? Then I think that's a great idea. But if I want to ensure, for me, that the board is working on it as a whole, as well as getting input, I'm just cautious on small special committees unless it's to get input. And is the community aware who's on this committee? How do you contact them to provide your input? I think that's important for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Wong.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I also support the idea of. We have worked on this bond for many years, and we consider it very important. And given its importance, then I think that involving the whole board might be a better approach. That is, we have all the ideas that from step one that can be shared on the whole board. I think the second benefit is actually if we have this item on the board meeting agenda, then I think the public can make comments in the first public session. So that means we can get the ideas right there. I mean, the reason is that I know that many people are here and they are very active, but on the hand, they also have their other things to do. And I think it's if we allow them to talk as early as possible, maybe we can maximize the ideas that we get from them. And the other thing is that also we are talking about the committees, and I'm for the idea of forming a committee involving community members. But I think the process can be pretty challenging. That is, who we should invite and who we should, how large that committee would be, and so on. So, but I think for the first, several months through June, then if we have this item on the agenda, then public are making comments and so on. In the process, I think that is a very beneficial process in the sense that we will get some ideas and also identify some personnel that definitely would help us. So I think that will also help us forming that kind of a committee that is going forward. With the committee itself, then I have some ideas about maybe not just one committee, in the sense that we have like 2 steps. One step is to design the bond, create a bond, right? I mean, that we have a committee that it can have best ideas that we can have. The other committee might be to campaign for the bond. Maybe that will be a later stage that we can also form that kind of committee. That can involve like some PTA people and all the other PTAs in schools and so on. So we will make sure that the job can be done effectively. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Scarpellino?
So I guess when it comes to whether to have it in strategic planning or to have it as the board as a whole, I thought it worked pretty effectively in strategic planning. It was something that they were like focused on, and that was their pretty much driving mission as long as I've been on the board anyway with that. And you know, the only maybe differences that I could see is sometimes maybe with some of the updates, getting some of the information ahead of time, so that when it is presented, we'd had some time to digest it beforehand. Because I'm not always the quickest on the uptake, so sometimes I don't always think of the question when I'm getting the information. I think of it later, and again, being able to have those conversations in public instead of sending an email later would be probably more helpful in the sense of people understanding what's going on and what we're talking about. Because I'm not saying I never got my questions were never answered. They were answered, but I wouldn't always think to ask them at the moment of the presentation. So to me, that would work. I understand what Dr. Wong's saying about maybe having it on the agenda to keep talking about it, so that then the community could come to voice their input. My concern about that is the way the board structure is and the way we have our meetings, which is the way it's supposed to be done. We do our business in public. We don't do it with the public. I worry that could get frustrating for the public because they could be up there making comments or asking questions, and this is not the forum for a back and forth. So that would be my only concern with something like that. Regularly discussing and updating at board meetings, I think, is a great idea. Even if it's that we had a meeting since last meeting, we haven't really moved it that much forward. Just even updating would be a good idea, but I don't think that this is the forum to have community input, just from the way it's structured. But I think the community input is important. You know, I think we've tried doing surveys before. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea for just a first go round, but you know, we send out surveys all the time on things, and people often are like, I never saw a survey. We did a survey on this, so I don't know how helpful that always can be. I do think an idea of a committee, sort of similar to what we did with the kindergarten curriculum, I think could be very helpful, so that we had a range of views and expertise on that committee, which I think really was helpful. But again, the important part is then conveying that information back out to the public. I think we need to be very sensitive to making sure we're constantly updating what the committee's doing, what were some of the issues that were raised, why did we conclude X instead of Y. So I think that can be very helpful, having a committee like that. And I think social media is going to be extremely important, because as we saw from this last, you know, the bond referendum, putting stuff out on our site, in our pages and things like that, is one thing, but where the community is engaging, that's the narrative. And if we're not paying attention to that, misinformation, false information, that becomes the fact, that becomes the reality, because we're not responding. So we need to have something in place that's going to deal with the community groups, or an ability, because as I believe Mrs. Seidel has already said, there wasn't a question ever posed out on the community group sites that we couldn't answer. So we need to find a mechanism for that to happen. That's all I got.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Tong?
Well, for me, as the new beginning Board of Ed.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. For me, for me, as the new BOE, I do, from the other end, before I was a board member, I see the other way. I see that we do need the community members get together, a town hall or forum, whatever works, to get people, as much as people together, get the information out. Getting into the social media, I think, is the second biggest thing today. The social media, it allow a lot of parents that's working or whatever time they can get into and look at it. They may not be able to come to town hall, but they'll give us the information. If we could interact with them, maybe appoint one person who is doing the bond referendum in very good the knowledge of the bond, what they need. Maybe that person needs to kind of communicate with the in a good way, so the community member sees it. Everybody can have questions. At the end, make sure we had gathered data. What are the main thing people concerned? When you get the data together, then you can decide what should the money use for wisely. Otherwise, the information is scattered all over, and we don't know what we're going to use the money with. All the money we spend for, we might not even repay everything we need, or what we wanted to, because we are not in the page of the community. And also the student input is very important. Student is what they live in for almost second home for them. They need to get their input, tell us what their concern is. How can we make the technology, kind of integrate the technology together at the time if we're going to put all that money in, whether it's a new building, repairment, whatever is necessary, the student is the one that give us the input. And then the teacher, of course, they also can give us input as well. So if we could put all these together, then we probably have a better bond, and then the thing will pass in a peaceful way without having a fight. Listen to the community, I think is the most important thing. I was there, I'm like, wow, that is painful. We don't know what we're spending all this money for. So it's time for us to make this work. All right, work together, and there's, if we can open to everybody, not just, I don't think one community or just committee, 1 or 2 people can do it, but one main person who knows how to get this bond good and answer to the public, and then getting the data together. That's, I think, is the key. Thank you.
Ms. Seidel.
Thank you. So I feel like I have a little bit of a different perspective regarding or opinion regarding the board input. I think right now we have a lot of question marks. So sort of during this question mark phase, where we're trying to determine what this looks like, what it feels like, how we're going to involve people, who we're going to involve, that discussion I would like to see as a full board, because there's still so many unanswered questions. Personally, again, having lived the committee structure for 4 years now, I think there's value in that. So I think at a certain point, possibly, again, my perspective, when we get to the point of beginning the project applications, once we've sort of narrowed down what we're interested in, I think that's the point where I think, I think it would be great for it to go back to a committee to work on the real, the nitty gritty, and then report out to that. So my opinion is that it's kind of a two-pronged approach for the board's input on this bond referendum. As far as community input, I mean, it's kind of redundant to what I said the last time, but I think we need to use all of these items that are listed on here with question marks, surveys, yes, forums, yes, town hall meetings, yes, building tours, yes, informational sessions, yes. I don't think anybody's surprised that I think social media is an absolute must. I think that there's a lot of questions about how we use social media, but social media is a yes. I think that an ad hoc committee is or a committee is a great idea. I guess my concerns about a committee, and I'm just looking at the resolution from 1998, I believe, when Mr. McIlvaine was board president, and they had 35 people on this committee. So both in my board life and in my professional life, big committees can be unwieldy, and they could be hard to work with, and you could be stuck in a lot of minutia and not be able to move forward. So I'm slightly worried about what the size of the committee would look like, how we would choose people for the committee. Again, just my 2 cents. If we move forward with the committee, I'd love to see that, we pick people that represent these various groups, Board of Ed, seniors, PTA, teachers, community members that were both for and against the bond, civic associations, etc. But I would ask that we charge those folks with being responsible for then holding subsequent meetings on their own to reach their various stakeholders, so that they're prepared to have the feedback of the larger community that they can then come share back with this committee, so that there isn't there's more opportunity to get work done when this committee gets together. So these committee members are really going to have a big responsibility, because there's a lot of differing opinions out there. And so I think these folks that we either invite or select or that volunteer to be part of this committee really have to be willing to do some of the heavy lifting to gather for data information gathering on their own, and be prepared to sort of present that back to the committee as a whole. So that's just some of my initial thoughts.
Thank you. And we'll go to Mrs. Matlack.
Thank you very much. Lisa and Jane stated some of what my thoughts were on the board input. Right now we need the full board discussion moving forward, so that we have direction, and this is a good forum to get that, and for the community to see what that direction is, and for the whole entire board to contribute to that direction. I believe that the continuity of our committee structure serves us well in a district this large. And in the past, we have had times when we've done committees of the whole, which for those who aren't familiar with that term, that is when the board member does committee work with the entire board. Some districts do that all the time, usually very small districts that have very small schools, number of students, and have a lot less to talk about. If we were to do something like that, our board meetings would be 4 to 6 hours long just for committee meetings because of the number of things that we have to talk about and discuss and approve. So I think there's a benefit to the way we do it, but I think we also need flexibility and to do things like this, having full board discussions when warranted. Jane brought up a point about when we use the committee structure, that sometimes it is difficult to process all the reports, especially when there's a lot, and when you're sitting at that meeting, you understand what's going on, but it is a lot to hear about. The summaries are all available. The notes from the administrators are all available in our files, so we can look at that. But going forward, especially when it comes to the bond discussion, we can certainly take that another step forward. And whether the bond then continues in strategic planning, or if we decide to put it in B&F, the chair of whichever committee it lands in could take it a step further and send out more detailed information, possibly sooner than when that is, so people have an opportunity to look at that. With that being said, people have to take responsibility to take a look at information ahead of time, and read that, which I know time-wise is difficult. At times, we all have lives and jobs and responsibilities outside of what we do here. So those are my thoughts on the board input. Community input. I was giving this a lot of thought because I was part of the sitting board members who were here for this last go around. So I'm thinking, what can we do differently? I came up with a dual purpose to community input. As I saw it, the first part would be soliciting input from the community. We did surveys last time. We could do something like that again. We could change the format. We could take a look at see, what kind of information did we receive from that last time? How was that valuable, and what do we need to receive this time? I think we could utilize our website better, because we do need a central point for people to get information and to be able to submit information. So I think there's a better way to utilize our website, for people to do both of those things. I'd like to see town halls that are run by board members. We kind of tried to get this going last time. Really didn't get off the ground, but for something like that, there'd have to be a format for each of the meetings so that it was run the same way, and that people coming to the meetings could know that they weren't going to be getting something at one but not at the other. And it would be somewhat of an informational session from the board perspective or administrators who are there, but it would mostly be a listening session for an opportunity for the community to share their ideas. Because I know that Dr. Wong and Mrs. Scarpolino talked about, having this discussion so that the public, it would be on our agenda and the public could speak beforehand. But we have to keep in mind that it's not an actionable item on our agenda. It's a discussion item. And right now, the way things are set up and our rules, and Mr. Green would have to weigh in if we were to discuss this any further. Only actionable items are discussed at the beginning of the meeting. And I think there's a benefit to that, because then the community has a chance to weigh in on something that we're just about to take action on. So they have an opportunity to weigh in before we do take that action. When we're discussing something, I think there's a benefit to the community hearing our discussion and what we're thinking before commenting to us and making assumptions about what our discussion may be. Because the discussion, even though community members are commenting after they hear our discussion, nothing is being acted on. So that means the discussion will continue. Whether that discussion, the discussion only stops when we actually put it up for a vote. So if it's not up for a vote, there's room for more discussion. So it gives us the opportunity to discuss, hear the community, take that into consideration, and discuss again. So that's my thoughts on that. The other part that I saw of community input was a community partnership with a district. And this is where I see the value of having an ad hoc committee. Excuse me, let me take a drink. I'm not used to talking so much. So this is where I see a value of having an ad hoc committee. And we would have to, if we decided that was a good way to go, that we'd have to talk about the logistics of that, the number of people. As you said, Mrs. Seidel, large committees are difficult for them to work with and to come to a consensus. We would need to set out a purpose and what their purpose was and what the time frame was for them. Those details would have to be worked out if that was the way we decided to go. I would like to see, if we did do that, that the ad hoc committee gave a report to the board before we made a decision on which projects to go forward with. So while the ad hoc committee would be working, the board would also be working in committee and moving forward. So two of them together, but separate, and then the committee coming to us and saying, so this is whatever they are charged with and how they were charged to do it. This is their report. And then the board proceeds with discussion going forward. Sorry to be so long-winded. I think that's all my thoughts for now on those two. Thank you.
Yep. So in regards to the committee versus the board, I mean, I think I would agree with probably Lisa and what Jane was saying. I mean, I do think there's merit in having the discussion with the full board in the beginning, but I also see the value in moving it back to a committee where that committee is after the fact. I think there's also some value in that as well. I do believe that a committee, somebody needs to take ownership of it after there's full board discussion. I would follow that up, though. I think there's a lot of value in, if it is sitting with a committee, that we have an ongoing full discussion as a full board, and we do it in the form of a board retreat, because the public is allowed to come to the board retreat. I'm not sure how many members of the public know they're allowed to come to our board retreat. It's usually just us on a Saturday here, but if we had a specific board retreat specific to the bond, to your point, Ms. Scarpolino, I think that would eliminate the public having to come and feeling frustrated at a strategic planning meeting or a work session meeting where we could just have a board retreat where we were having ongoing discussion about the board, where we could cascade out that, even if for nothing more, just to cascade out the update on where the committee was at that particular time. Those the timing, it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, it could be on a Monday, it could be on a Saturday, but I think that would be, for me, a good way to continue that discussion as a full board and to have the public that only wants to come and hear information about the board come and have that information be cascaded out to them. But so for me, that is, I think, probably a good way to kind of get that information out after that moves to a committee. But I do think it's important for a committee to move it after full board discussion, because I do believe somebody needs to own that. In regards to kind of the community involvement, I personally am a big fan of the committee idea. I liked the recommendation from Andy when he came and kind of made that recommendation to BNF. For me personally, when I'm on a committee at work, I feel invested. I show up. It becomes a date on my calendar that I don't miss. That's why I think having a committee on something that is so large for our community would be just important to get that community involvement. I can understand the concern with having 35 or so members, but we are a large community, so my concern would be, are we choosing the right, not even necessarily are we choosing the right, but are we getting the melting pot of what is Cherry Hill? I mean, to be honest, we all love this community and we're all here for the right reasons. So my biggest thing would be, are we getting the melting pot of what makes up our community in this committee? I'm less concerned about the size and more concerned about who are we putting in this committee. For me, I'm fine with the conflict that would come from it. My experience at work, conflict sometimes brings the best solutions. So I think that's kind of what we need. I also think that it's great that we did this a few years ago and it was successful. And for me, the best thing about doing a committee is that we would have bond champions that would help us spread kind of the message. So I think, though, if we're going to go down the committee, that there needs to be a hard and fast rule that if you're on the committee, we may not always agree, there may be conflict, but the end result is that we all put our hands in at the end, and the end goal is that we are going to come together. We're not all going to get what we want, but at the end of the day, that the goal is to pass the bond for Cherry Hill. So those are my kind of takeaways. But I am a big fan. I love committees. I think they work. They've worked for me professionally. So those are my comments.
So I myself, I believe that my opinion that it's not done through a committee per se. I agree with Dr. Wong that it should be put together as far as the stages of it. It should be put together, or excuse me, the beginning phase, and as well as far into it as it can until it becomes, very laborious for an entire board. That could be something that is discussed further on. And the reason why I believe it is, we'll have 18 years in this room and then out in the community to utilize not only the entire board, the board, but community members. Those people who, such as Andy, who are willing to help out, and other community members that are able to lend a hand in their expertise, could be part of an ad hoc committee, a community committee where they can, they can be involved as well, and really get out there with the community. After December 11th, I contacted the Princeton Board of Education president. I knew that they had a bond that was destined to fail, and they had ultimately passed it, and I wanted to know what were the things that they did differently and when they changed directions. There was an awful lot of good information in there as to how they took what they had already built, re-engaged the community, innovative ways, and then put something together based upon the yes votes, the no votes, and the people who didn't vote. So I would suggest that maybe board leadership, reach out to them as well. I have the contact information. He's no longer the president at this time. So community input, not only surveys, obviously those are important and all the things that are listed are important, but I agree with Mrs. Matlack regarding town halls. Maybe we do something innovative where we have 3 series of 3 Saturday dates, maybe spanning 6 weeks, where it involves 3 board members and then different people from the community who are on this ad hoc committee, and it'd be like a 5-hour event each day where people from the community can come in as they're able to. So you make a day of it, and you invite them in, and you make it an event where it's, you know, bring your children as well, get the people out there. Allow them to know that they can come and go as needed based upon their schedule. You do 3 of them, 3 board members each one. This way they get a rolling feel. So the whole entire board is involved. And then, you know, you could break out into breakout groups where you have, you know, a community member with yes votes, no voters, and then a board member, maybe an administrator or 2, and then you begin to have these circular conversations where they intertwine. I think that's something that could be looked at. Obviously, social media, I know Lisa had mentioned it. You know, there are communities, or excuse me, there are boards in the general area that have social media Facebook pages that are ran by the board and questions are answered by the board president. So that is definitely possible. I think that if we attempt to do again what was done, and if we attempt to do it a certain way, it's my opinion that we're going to get what we already got, which is unfortunately a bond that most citizens couldn't go to the voting booth and vote yes for. The majority of them did not do so. So I think it's important that we don't try to make it look like something that is new. It has to be new. It has to be innovative. It has to be new. And some of those ideas, I hear that. I agree with Dr. Wong in inviting the community all the time to the Board of Education meetings. I agree, we're allowing them to speak first. There's a lot of people out there, and they want to speak. For them to have to sit through board business, you know, there are bylaws which pertain to community input at board meetings. Maybe we look at that. We make a temporary bylaw to allow community members to address the bond issue up front during the meeting. We can change the bylaws. Let's not allow process, which we have the ability to change, impede our mission of creating a bond which the community members will support. I mean, that is for sure. So that's something that we may want to look at, because, you know, people are, if they're out here now, we want them to be able to speak and then do what they have to do. Those are just a few ideas.
Okay, thank you. I want to throw my 2 cents in, and then I'll definitely throw it open. I guess of the things that I've heard even tonight, I initially my thought was that we would definitely want to go towards a board as a whole in terms of the discussion on the bond. But I heard some of the things that Lisa spoke to, as well as Carol and Jane. Some of the things that I think, at least I never had thought about, the idea of initially having it, the whole board speaking to it and the whole board addressing it, until it gets to the point where we had to really start doing real work. And then at that point in time, once we settle on what we want to do and give clear direction, then a committee could take that and work it. Once it's clear what the board and the community as a whole is looking to do as far as moving forward. So I really like that idea of starting off with the board as a whole, and then also moving down to committees, a committee after that point. Also, as far as community input. I like the idea of the ad hoc committee. I know it would be very difficult. It seems like it could be difficult and challenging, and we have had ad hoc committees in the past, especially I think it was 10 years ago, the bond. The committee went through and had all these proposals and things like that they wanted to see done, and then the recession of 2008 happened, and really I think that it was used as input into this current bond, but nothing happened at the time. So, but I like the idea of having that committee. Not exactly sure how we would work all the details around it. I think that was something we'd have to work through. But definitely also the idea of other ways to try to get input, you know, whether it be surveys or other ways to get input. So those are some of my thoughts. And at this point in time, I'll throw it open to anyone that has any other comments, or even our students if they had comments there as well.
I just wrote down a couple of things based off of what I was seeing last year, and part of the discussion that we had back in December. I agree with Mrs. Schultz with the whole idea of bringing in, I forget what the exact term that you use, but sort of like bond forum meetings that are separate from the action meetings and the work sessions, and held at more reasonable times for the community, because I think that a lot of the frustration within the community and from the community members was that the Tuesday nights are not easy for families, and there are a lot of people who want to be involved in this discussion but aren't able to make it out of the house on a Tuesday night to come to these meetings, especially when they have to sit through the whole action agenda, the whole work session. And I know from the perspective of someone who's sat there waiting to make a public comment, it can be frustrating to watch an entire agenda that is completely unrelated to what you're trying to say. It's helpful now that the board is having these discussions about the bond, but to kind of separate the two sort of branches of what's going on and have the work sessions and the action meetings where the board can work on whatever they need to do, both related to the bond and related to everything else that needs to happen, but then having specific forum or public discussion meetings where the board is present and it's more of a discussion with the community than a separate sort of comment from the board, comment from the community, and no really work together. Also, having social media, I don't know the regulations on the board on what you're able to do in terms of social media, but I know you currently live stream all the meetings and you do the coffee with Dr. Malash and all of those things, but to even have like the board sitting and having a discussion about the bond and having someone have a live stream up where people are able to make comments about what's going on, and someone can say, oh, someone just asked this question, let's discuss this. So at least people feel like they're being heard and they're being responded to. Just finding more ways to get responses out to people and have more conversations, but to also make sure that people don't have to come out on a Tuesday night or sit through an entire meeting, and they can be a part of this conversation from their homes and on the internet without necessarily doing it through Facebook. And kind of shifting it towards a more informed discussion. So yeah, that was the main thing, is kind of looking at different ways in which community members can get involved. I know, I don't know if you're able to do Skype conversations with committee members so they don't have to leave their house to come out to a different meeting place. If they could have a huge, or depending on the size of the committee, a Skype call, so it's not limiting people to whoever's able to make it out to a meeting at whatever time. But just coming up with more ways to make meetings and information more accessible to people, and getting students and teachers involved in the discussions as well. That's all.
Sure. I just wanted to add on to a point that Ms. Scarpolino made earlier, just about the issue of when you're in an info session and you're just being inundated with all these facts and processes and other things, and for some people it just takes a while to even digest that before you even get a chance to critically break it down for yourself and assess it in the context of your values and your priorities, and figuring out any sort of questions or suggestions that you might want to make in relation to the information that you've been presented with. So I think just we have to find ways to make it easier for people to get those questions, comments, and concerns to the board members or the members of the ad hoc committees just as they come to the people, not necessarily they could be at the forums too, but like beyond that, just as they come up. Mrs. Matlack was also making comments about improving the utility of the bond website and other online resources for people to find information and get clarifications. Perhaps one suggestion could be to just have a page, like a subpage on that website, where it's just sort of like a suggestion / question portal, where if it's just like on a Wednesday night after a board meeting and something pops into your head like, oh, that didn't sound right, or oh, I have an idea that I didn't get to talk to the board members about the other night, then you can just like go online, take the time to think through your thoughts, and just put through a thorough suggestion or detail all the parts of your question, and then the board members will and the committee members will be able to look through those responses and take suggestions into account when they're making new policy, or just to think through responses to really loaded questions that sometimes pop up where the format of a formal discussion just doesn't allow you the right time or the access to the right information to fully answer to those concerns. So yeah, that's just one suggestion I had for just improving the flow of information and civil communication between board members, committee members, and members of our community on this issue.
Well, actually, I just want to clarify, what I said, because to me, I think, I'm not making like a drastic changes to the tradition. I study history and I love the past. I don't, but on the other hand, because I study history, I also know that tradition is often changed. Okay, so I think now we have this bond. We're going to recreate this bond. I think this is a time for us to rethink our approach. So, and from the legal perspective, maybe things will be different. But from my perspective, letting public speak in the first public session or the second public session does not make any sense. I mean, make a major difference, because I'm not saying that we're going to have like an active dialogue with. It's still receiving information. And I also know that in other, board, in other districts, the board actually only have like one or even more public sessions. So I mean, it's something that we can change. The other thing regarding the committee work, I support what Dave was saying, that we can make changes. We can adjust the bylaws, not just for the strategic committee, but also for say the CNI committee. I've been serving on that for several months, and so a lot of nice things are reported to the committee first, then to the whole board. To me, I think it's if we say the Parcc score, that just being made to the whole board. There's no need why we have to go through the CNI committee. Now CNI committee is often like more than 90 minutes, 70 minutes or 90 minutes. I mean, the things are repeated there. So I mean, if we're some items that can be discussed, yes, at the CNI meeting, committee meeting first, then we talk about as the whole board. But if we're talking about presentations, I mean, they are so important, they are crucial for the whole district. Then just make it as the whole board. So that means, I mean, all the committee and the structures, things, we can possibly rethink and reconsider, and from this point on. So this is how I think.
So just sort of a couple things that just came to my mind as people were speaking, because those of you that can see me, I was nodding like as everybody talk, because I think everybody, I mean, this is a great discussion, right? This is what we intended to happen tonight. So just sort of regarding our process and potentially letting comments come first, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I mean, I know that I've sort of advocated for that in the past, and hey, let's make this easier on everybody. But for tonight specifically, we as a board have not had a single opportunity to discuss the bond since it went down. So for me personally, it was premature. Like, I felt the board was obligated and entitled to have the initial discussion just to even see where any of us stood on where to move forward. So for me, I felt like I needed to hear from my colleagues first so I could sort of compartmentalize that, put that aside, and then be ready to hear from the public. So that's just, again, my 2 cents on specifically tonight and why I felt it was really important that we have a first opportunity to have a discussion. I love any ideas around town halls. I think that it's a great forum and we can get into more details about how it's organized, how it's structured. But what it's really going to require is full commitment from every member of the board to attend and participate, and that it's not 1, 2, or 3 members attending these 19, 20, 25, 30, 35 meetings. The idea of 5 hours on a Saturday is fantastic if it's not the same people committing to sign up for those events, because like you ladies said, people have lives, and the community members have difficulty leaving their house on a Tuesday night. And as a working mom with 3 kids at home, I have difficulty leaving the house on a Tuesday night as well. So we're going to need commitment from a board that that's the route we want to go. If we're going to make the commitment to the public that we're going to engage with them, then I feel very strongly that we need the commitment from everybody around the table that you're going to participate. We're going to participate equally as colleagues. So I'm confident we will get there. I really felt obligated to say that out loud. So thank you.
Any other comments?
I have one last comment. So regarding the idea of a community, a committee with the community, to be clear, I don't think that that's a bad idea. I just want to be sure that the community is then aware of the people that's part of the committee, of who they can go to provide their feedback, so that it's not a committee of unknown representation.
Okay. So what we talked about, and I took a lot of copious notes here, but what I do believe, it seems like we do have consensus around the fact that initially we do want to have these bond discussions as a whole board. And the piece that I believe where we should go, and I want to get input, but once we get to a point where we know exactly what we want, how we want to structure and move forward, I think it does make sense for this to go to a committee and move regular report outs, but go into a committee from that perspective. So I'll take a straw poll. Is anybody opposed to that approach, starting off as a whole, but once we get to a point where we feel like we know what we need to do, or where we need to, which direction we want to go in, handing it off to have the committee move forward?
As long as when we hand it off to a committee, when we do hand it off, there's a clear path as to how we're going to then continue the communication to the full board. Like when we hand it to the committee, I just want to make sure that we're then handing it to the committee and saying, but here's the steps on how we're going to continue to communicate to the full board, and we outline that as part of that process.
Mrs. Matlock.
I don't think it has to be, all or nothing. Like once we hand it over to a committee, that's it. There may come a point where there's something that, needs to have full board discussion, and that there's no sense in having the discussion in the committee only to bring it then to the full board and have another discussion about it. you know, it can be a little more fluid, you know, like that. Maybe that would help to know that, you know, that that is allowed for, which in the past, you know, when we've done committee of the whole, you know, it's not something we do all the time, but sometimes, you know, our agenda allows us to do that, and our schedules allow that to happen. You know, so it's not all or nothing. You know, I just wanted to point that out.
Mr. Cohen? Yes. We would also have, like, teachers, people like that on the committee, correct? Also, absolutely. Not just... Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure out a way to move forward because we don't have meetings outside of our public meetings. So, you know, sometimes it's difficult to move forward and get stuff done. So there's 9 members on the board. There's 3 sort of key topics that you threw out there. And I don't know that we've done this before, so I'm just throwing it out there. So is it possible for, you know, 3 members of the board to just start to, you know, work together independently, throw together some ideas, you know, you assign us to a topic, and that way we start to have some discussion, put together some ideas to then present back to the rest of the group to start to narrow this down and sort of frame it out and see what it looks like. Again, from a logistics standpoint and rules and regs and our bylaws, I'm not 100% sure what we can and can't do. It wouldn't be a quorum. It's 3 people. I just feel like there needs to be some work happening. And we kind of need to dig into it. And so, I mean, look, I'm willing to stay here a long time tonight if we want to do it now. I just think it might be easier if we sort of divided it up and then got back together and say, here's some ideas, let's share them. Just sort of throwing that out there.
Okay. I was thinking along the lines, and I think that's definitely an approach. I was thinking more along the lines of if we gave it to administration and said these are the 3 areas we want to focus on, and they came back with suggestions, we could still talk about them and discuss them, but ask them to come back with ideas and suggestions on how we can move forward, and then we can take it as a board. And if we want to expand on it, that's fine, but at least have them take a first cut at that in terms of suggestions on how we can do those. Does that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mrs. Matlack.
Yeah, at least I think that, your idea has merit, but we've all heard a lot of information tonight, and I think maybe we need to, digest that and think ourselves, maybe there's some ideas that we've heard that we hadn't considered when we were pulling our own thoughts initially together for tonight. Like with social media, I think we all need to think about how we want to do that. But I think it's important to also hear from administration and give them time to have a chance to discuss what we talked here tonight, and give us their feedback on these ideas that they've heard and from their perspective, and how that could work, and so we can work together on moving forward with these ideas. So my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. So
is there any reason we can't do both?
No, there's no reason we can't do both. I guess I was just suggesting that we give the administration the first shot at it, and then we can get together and we can form committees or however we want to do it, to groups to look at it.
Yeah, no, that piece I just was, I guess, in the interest of just kind of trying to keep the conversation moving forward to what Lisa was saying. If administration works on it, and then we do what Lisa was saying, 3 of us get together and each take something, when we come together, it might just be a more meaningful conversation. If they were presenting, if administration was coming to us and saying, hey, here's kind of what we were thinking, and the board was coming together and saying, here's kind of what we were thinking, then at least we could kind of at least say, hey, here, we're meeting on the table. If we wait for administration to come with their suggestions, then we're almost delaying at another meeting by just a suggestion. That's all.
Can I just as a thought, just to weigh in with where you guys are, I just would be very careful if you as board members tonight are going to establish additional subcommittees. Are you going to advertise those? When the 3 of you get together, where are you meeting? What work are you doing? All that kind of stuff. Not that, the 3 of you, as long as you don't have a quorum, you all can get together, right? But I just caution you, if one of the concerns that we heard from the community was about transparency and how work was being done, just please, you are the board, right? You are the duly elected 9 people for our community. But if 3 of you all at different times are getting together to talk about stuff and then coming back, I just encourage you to be very careful about what that looks like.
I'm sorry, I guess maybe, Lisa, I may have misunderstood. I was just taking it just to start maybe collecting ideas and thoughts, and maybe just throwing ideas together, not necessarily like a really in-depth, like, this is what we're earmarking, more of just a...
Correct.
Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. I would like to throw out this suggestion that so I captured 3 items, and tell me if there's more that you guys would like to take from this list. But it seems like the top 3 items were the town hall meetings, social media, and the informal ad hoc committee. And so my suggestion is that we give the administration the opportunity to do that. But also I would suggest that normally we don't have these kind of discussions at our action meeting, but maybe over the next few meetings we might want to consider having a section in there during even our action meeting to have a discussion on the bond. So that way we keep the discussion moving forward. I know as a board we're meeting. We have our meeting next week, and I mean there's a lot of things that we're going to be meeting over the next few weeks. So I think we need to kind of look at it from that perspective as well, and that would be my suggestion. We asked the administration to put time on the action agenda for even a bond discussion during that. So, Mrs. Matlack.
I was just going to ask Mr. Green if maybe he could just, tell us procedurally, how we would do that at an action meeting, where we would list that to have a discussion item on there.
Well, you are quite free in terms of how you would set that up. That's within the board's discretion. So it could be basically a particular item that could be added as a standing item to the meetings, similar to new business or old business. You could be a subset of old business. Normally what I would recommend is you have a specific item for this on the agenda that would come at the end of the regular business. Okay. But it can go at the beginning too. You can put it really on anywhere on the agenda you prefer to. Normally, the way most boards do it, you run through your regular committee agendas, and then you would have really under like an old business type of an ongoing project, you would list it on the agenda there, typically.
Thank you.
Okay. So to wrap this up, what I heard tonight and what I'm suggesting that we move forward with is, number one, that we will be having a overall committee of a whole to discuss the bond specifically, and we'll be having those discussions over the next few weeks, as specifically discussing that. Number two, that we're gonna initially ask administration to give us some recommendations around town hall meetings, around social media, and also around the ad hoc committee. And then we'll continue this discussion during our next board meeting with a special item, even though it's an action meeting, with a special item to continue the board discussion. Do we have consensus on that? Are we good with that approach? Okay. Okay, great.
I do have one question on those three items, just to be sure. There's other items that were listed in here, such as building tours, informational sessions. They would be included as well, but those were the three big takeaways, correct?
Those will be the three big takeaways that we would be asking administration to look into. I think we are already, from a community perspective, we'd have to look at those others, but those are the big items. Okay. So with that, I would say that we're ending our discussion on this for tonight. Our discussion, we have consensus on a couple on some items there. I think that's good progress, so I would like to end our strategic planning discussion for now, and with moving forward with those items. Okay. And now, with that being said, I want to move forward with our next public comment section. And once again, please come up to the mic, speak your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes to make any comments. And when the light is yellow, there's 30 seconds left. And when the light is red, please conclude your comments. All right.
Jade Lane. I'm very, very encouraged by. Oh. What? Is it on? Okay, good. Andy McIlvain, 23 Jade Lane. Person who needs no introduction, but I do it anyway. 3 suggestions. One is that I'm very, well, a comment and 3 suggestions. I'm very, very encouraged by this discussion that I've heard tonight. I think that a lot of good points were made. 3 points that I'd like to make. One of which, there's no reason why the board input and the board discussion and the community input in the ad hoc committee can't be parallel discussions. They're not necessarily end to end or side to side. You know, you can just do it that way. Second thing is, in 1999, we had a specific set of circumstances, and we wrote the charge that we gave to the Bond Projects Committee according to the circumstances that we had at that point. You need to be very, very careful in creating that committee to make sure that you understand what the charge is that you're giving to that committee, and also that they understand what the charge is and what the parameters are, and we establish those at the beginning of the committee. And the third thing is that the size of the committee we did deliberately, and then we immediately, and it may sound cumbersome, but it actually worked, we broke the 25 or 30 people down into subcommittees, and we gave them topics to discuss, and then had them basically report back analogous to the committee of the whole, and had our discussion in those ways. So those are the three considerations I would give back to you in terms of the organization of the committee. Thank you very much.
Miriam Stern, 121 Ashford Road. It seems like it's so much louder than when you spoke. Sorry. So going into tonight, I was actually concerned this was going to be the same old, same old. I didn't feel that way from the December 18th meeting, but seeing that there was no publication in any wide way about tonight's discussion. There was a weekly email that went out, which invited community members to engage in conversation, but nothing specific that this was a really important meeting. And the community should have been notified widely, just as, bond meetings were notified widely, principals sent out emails, bookmarks were sent home. This meeting should have been announced very widely, and I don't think that it was, and many of us were trying to communicate to the public. I texted a bunch of people, hey, this meeting's happening, I hope you can come. So just a comment, but I don't feel that way at all. This has been an amazing, impressive meeting. I'm so encouraged by so many things I heard tonight. I just want to clarify, as a community member who has asked and posted about and talked about wanting transparency, what that means to me is that information is being communicated and the community is being engaged. It doesn't mean that we don't support, or I don't support, which I do, board leadership and board responsibility to have important offline conversations. That's part of your role. That's why we elected you. So please do what you know and what you have expertise in, but just make sure to include us and to communicate what the discussions are before moving forward. And if you notice that you have those discussions and communications and there's a negative response from the community, pivot. That's what I think so many community members would like to see, is a willingness to change direction, which is something that I read about happened in Princeton. It was just impressive to me. I don't think the discussions are valuable when they are educating the community. I think it has to be, we have to reverse. One of my kids has a reverse classroom teaching method, and it's fascinating, and the kids love it, and it's really successful. I think we need a kind of a reverse collaboration with the community, where the community really brings forward a lot in parallel to what the board is doing, in parallel to what the administration is doing. I may continue to go on. Facebook Live meetings as part of the town hall. You mentioned having during the noon hour with the superintendent, there were questions that were submitted. There are so many community members who want to come to these meetings and can't because of when they are. If there was a way to submit questions as people are watching the live stream, because a lot of people watch the live stream, I hear about that. That's another way to engage people. I think if there's going to be a survey, it needs to be, do people want a bond, and how big are they willing to make a bond? And do people want new buildings? Do people want other ways to fund buildings, projects that were part of the previous bond? Do we want naming rights? Do we want partnerships with businesses? I think we have to find out what the community wants with that. We have to consider those options. Why isn't there someone from the town council or township representative here, and why don't we send someone to the town council meetings? There should be more of a liaison role that has to happen back and forth.
The light's not working, but your 3 minutes are up. Sorry.
What?
That
went so fast.
Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Goodwin.
Yes.
It's Barbara Wilson. Could I try starting the timer to see if the light is working now. We tried unplugging it and resetting. If you can give me just a moment to try that and see if it's working.
All right.
Thank you. Last comment. The community talent that exists, why not have a board Facebook page, and when you are ready to maybe break down into the committees the work that needs to be done, the actual project work, why not say, invite the community, you know, those of you who have this, anyone who works in whatever area, you know, love to have you come aboard. Engage people. Thank you.
I'm gonna try it one more time.
Okay.
It's not. It's not working.
Yeah, it's not working.
I can still time.
Okay.
But I will need someone who can see me. I'll do 30.
Okay.
I'll do the yellow paddle at 30 seconds. We're going old school. 30
All right,
seconds.
30 seconds.
When we're finished, I'm gonna do this.
Okay.
And try not to be rude and yell at people, but we'll do it this way. So my
No
I will
promises.
hold tight. I will hold tight. All right.
You ready?
So I will start when you start speaking.
Good evening. My name is Kim Bridell. I live at 9 Gately Court. I just want to say a couple of things. I want to go back to earlier in the meeting first. And I hope that with all these letters that you spoke about, the Genesis, the family life, that they're going out in multiple languages, because we have multiple languages. So sending a letter out in English to a family who doesn't speak English isn't going to be effective. So I just throw that out there. Now, as to the bond, Mrs. Schultz, I want to say I really, really found your comments on point. The committee needs to have multiple people with different opinions, and there needs to be conflict, because if everybody's on board going yes, 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 we're going to be at no again. So I think that was very on point. I want to just throw this out, and I'm trying to be very brief. It was a rough day today. One of the things that you might want to consider in your focus groups, town halls, etc., is something called a community cafe. I won't go into 3 minutes of describing it, but it is a great way to engage community. You would have questions, and the community would sit in groups rotating and asking these questions, and you would get the same question answered by multiple people in different environments. You can use it with the seniors, you can use it at the high school, you can use it with students, teachers, parents. If you want more information, I'm happy to share it, but it is a really useful, engaging conversation, because you're not speaking at people, it's dialogue and it's input. That's all I'm going to say tonight.
Mrs. Friedel, if you'll send the information about the community cafe to Mrs. Wilson, thank you.
Ready? Okay. Jen Nadio, 224 North Madison Avenue. Just wanted to say that, you know, committees have been formed and created here in the district, and people haven't been able to know who's been on the committee. The current CPAG names have not been released. I realized there were only 9 of us out of the 20 who showed, but we really need comments from the other families in our district. The other 2,500 families or students should have their voice heard, and that happened with the kindergarten committee, and then it's now happening with the CPAG. So when you're thinking about the bond and the committee, I really wanted to thank Mrs. Neri for making that comment, because we need to know who they are, and we need to be able to communicate with them. I think you've gotten to know me pretty well, and I have the comments and the ideas that are coming from me are not mine. They're your community, and we have parents right now who are preparing for IEPs who are a nervous wreck, and I said to my board over the weekend, I said, you know, I think the calls are going to start coming. They started last night. So when I come to you, I'm not coming as Jen Nadio, although sometimes I have to for my boys. I'm coming to you as, you know, the voice of the Cherry Hill Special Ed PTA. And since the CPAG is not up and running and no one knows who they are, honestly, CHSEPTA is still your CPAG. So, you know, I just wanted to throw that out there, and the conversation tonight was very encouraging. So thank you all very much.
Hello, my name is Jeff Podowitz, 110 Kilburn Drive. This is from the New Jersey Economic and Fiscal Policy Work Group, Path to Progress, August 9th, 2018. There was a little bit of a discussion in November at the end at the last meeting. So this is from Education Reform at the administrative level, page 19, bottom. The state is currently required to fund 85% of the cost of extraordinary special education for students who special education costs more than $40,000. State reimbursement in July 2017 just covered 45%, so they didn't fund it like they should. And then it goes on to say, meanwhile, the current capitation formula provides districts with the same funding for special education, regardless of how many regular special ed students they have provides no financial incentive. Basically, it's capitated. It was called the census method of special education funding. But we don't do the census method of special education funding. There was a report in 2011 that said we're not doing it, and that's because it's capitated, but then it's put out. Then it's census method, but then it's put into equalization aid, and the equalization aid has been capped. So for the beginning of the beginning of SFRA, we have never been getting the money for our at-risk students, ever. And we've never said anything about it. And it's turned out to a lot of money, so a lot of money. So these are the people that did it, and now they're saying, oh, gee. But no, it's not OG. Recommendation, they want to merge all K4, K5 districts into 12. I'm sure Lenape really wants that. They're going to have a district of 15 to 20,000 kids. That's right. Permit the establishment of 2 county-wide school district pilot programs. I hope you fight against that, because that's the last thing we need, is to have a county-wide district. Washington Township fought about it when it was brought up about 10 years ago. Please don't let it be this district that's part of a county. Establish a state-level group to address students for whom an individual IEP placement is considering residential. It's a move towards full state funding and administration of extraordinary special ed aid. The importance about that subject is that actually they're not part of the IEP team. So basically what they're saying is they're going to pay for it, but they haven't paid for it for all these years, and now they want to be part of the IEP team, because what they want to do, they want to meet with district representatives and family to review all evaluations and information. And then they established a special education study commission, but there was one done in 2015. So they established a commission already. They're just repeating themselves, and they're the ones that caused the problem. And God, please, I hope you have something decided so we will not be part of a county-wide school district. That's all, and I hope you have something prepared for that.
Thank you.
Jennifer Brumbaugh, 1758 T Rose Lane. I echo the sentiments of others saying that this was a really encouraging meeting to listen to. I've been coming for almost a year now, and it was really encouraging to hear differing opinions, questioning. I have a lot of encouragement that things are going to go better with this second iteration of the bond. I love the idea of the two-prong approach. Just being privy to hearing the conversation amongst you is so helpful to really realize we're all looking at the same end goal. It really helps. I cannot emphasize that enough. I've been coming to a lot of these, and I know you're all accomplished, intelligent, good people, but it's hard to really get the sense of who you are without hearing you talk. So I love the idea of the two-prong approach. I hope that this kind of open discussion goes on for maybe a couple months, and then it makes perfect sense to me that when discussion gets more granular, you go to committee and then come back and kind of give us reports. Sounds like a perfect path forward. I would like to throw out one concern I have is, like, I feel like there's all this enthusiasm now and everybody's all gung-ho and kind of rebuilding this and redesigning it. I'm a little concerned about throwing all our eggs into one basket, and I would love to see one person tasked with kind of having their spidey sense, figuring out if there's items that we're discussing about folding into a bond that could be funded some other way. Grants, I know Dr. Malash, you mentioned there was some discussion of having a shared services agreement with a grant writer. I think we really need to pursue that, and like Miriam has mentioned, naming rights. I would like to see one person who it's their task to try to kind of flag items that we might be able to fund in another way. I think I'd like to see that from the get-go. Thank you.
Good evening, Rick Short, 1002 Chelton Parkway. For the general, what just occurred tonight, the only thing I must ask is please, and I'll say this 3 times, please, 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 don't set a date. Please don't do anything formal until you get whatever committee or whatever you get set up, have the community and the committee come together and come up with a date. That's the first thing. And then the last thing I would suggest for the entire bond is at the very end, there should be like a final meeting. I don't know how it goes or what happens, where everything's out on the table. The district comes to the community one last time. They present it back to the community. They say, these are the changes, and we debate it. And we debate it to death. Because if you want the community support, you have to have everyone. And I understand it'll never be a perfect bond, and not everyone will get everything they want, which is fine. But you need to have that one final community meeting with the district so we're all on board and we're all saying yes. All right, now I'm going to jump back to this, and I'm going to quote Mr. Sugars there. I hope that come this summer that we finally get 14 schools with security cameras, and we finally get, and we know that all the films are being applied and everything. And I'll also send you for your Friday night packets to read over another district, which is totally transparent about every piece of security that's involved. And everybody needs to get behind it. That's an important thing. So what are the 4 sources for funding for our security that needs to be done this summer? Again, budget. It could be in the budget. It could be in the New Jersey bond. It can be from fair funding, the $3 million it could take. And there's also a blank check with the Mayor Khan, supposedly. The other thing I want to talk about is when Mount Laurel, they listed as contact us if you see any security deficiencies. Again, folks, I was here I spoke to a representative December 5th. I told you about a lock. This is easy stuff. Parents should not find security gaps. Right here in Mount Laurel, on the top of their subject, it says, contact us if you find security deficiencies. I came here on 12/18. There was no locks on those gates. I'm back here again. I shouldn't come back in 60 days saying that there are no locks. The other thing is the security guard at West, not at a good place. He's armed. You have to listen, and you have to follow the state rules, because you're not. Thank you.
Eileen Doran, 47 Bryn Mawr Avenue. Just a couple things. I agree with really everything that's been said by the people going before me. A couple things that struck me during this. I loved the discussion. It was refreshing. It was wonderful to be a part of it. As Miriam said, though, I'm real concerned that more people couldn't be here to see this good work that was done tonight. And part of that was because it really wasn't advertised. I did my very best on a couple of different social media sites to put, to copy your agenda to them, to let them know the bond was a part of it, to invite them to come. But I think that we need to use the Minute with Malash and the weekly communication and any communication we can have to get people out here, to let them know that this is a place for their voices to be heard, and also for them to see the great dialogue that's happening, that you are considering some of their concerns. It benefits, you know, everyone here just as much as the community. To that, you know, you've talked about how to engage the community in the bond process, and you've come up with the things that are important to you as a board and where you think you're going, and you've now tapped for the administration to talk about how they want to or think we should engage the community. But we haven't talked to the community about how the community wants to be engaged. So I think that's the another piece that we need to, you know, maybe find out. You know, maybe building tours are really important to getting the community to see exactly the conditions we're talking about, or maybe surveys are something they feel are a way to really be able to share information when they can't come to meetings. You've got great ideas, and I think some of them are made from what you've observed the community saying on social media and other meetings, but I think you need to be really intentional about asking them how they would like to be engaged. And when, like others have said, when a committee is drawn up together, it really needs to be a known committee. Too many secret committees with secret members and things that in this last year, we need to know who those people are, and we need to have a mechanism for contacting them directly. And I think that was alluded to in if we're going to ask them to go back to their stakeholders, but the stakeholders also need to be able to bring information to them. And the last thing I would say is something that you talked about at the very beginning, the date you've set for September. I would just caution you, you know, I kind of get a lot of feedback from the community myself. For right or for wrong, they saw a date not on the general election as voter suppression. And you don't, I see Ms. Malik shaking her head, and I'm saying, I'm not saying that you intended it that way. I'm just sharing from what, you know, I'm getting from the community. So if you're going to go for a date that's not the November election, you're going to need to communicate clearly the reasons behind that decision ahead, not, you know, later. So that just really needs to be communicated. If that's the best, if that truly is the best date, you need to communicate your reasons, because it will be received as voter suppression. If you are going to do a date, if at all possible, make it the whole day. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you very much.
I'm sorry I didn't see. I'm trying to look.
Yeah, I barely saw it too.
I know, I did peripherally, I'm sorry.
Ann Einhorn, 1017 Edgemore Road. First of all, I was part of a committee that supported the bond. We never met in secret. It was never a secret committee. It was a bunch of community members who may have indeed had contacts with the school district in what manner, but it was never a secret committee. So let me just get that out there, because I'm so tired of hearing that it was a conspiracy committee and it was a secret committee. I just can't believe we're still using that word. I don't see the bond going September 2020 with what was discussed tonight, but I will tell you that you should indeed go back to committee of the whole. I would also recommend that you advertise it as a strategic planning committee, okay? Keep that venue. In the past, the board and the superintendent and facilities at the time directed us as to the issues that were concerning the schools. We took that out as community members who believed in our system, and we went forth from there. It was the same information at all times. I got a little nervous when I heard we'll have ad hoc three-member board members having little committees. I don't think that serves us well under the guise of transparency. Okay, the intent is good, but with the level of suspicion that still seems to remain in this community, I think I would table that as one of your end products, but definitely do committee of the whole. I will tell you, I don't know what's happened to the boards over the years. There was plenty of discussion, okay? We were sometimes till 1 o'clock in the morning, Andy, okay? We had total civic involvement without benefit of any social media at the time. So I don't know what's going on, because I was certainly part of that era. I'm certainly part of this era. I still make the time. I was also raising children and working 6 days a week when I was a board member. So I found the time, and I pursued the issue of finding out when the meetings were. I hate it when I forget it. It's hard to be old. There was another thing I wanted to mention. I don't know. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say, Mrs. Seidel. During the process of the last bond referendum and trying to get the vote out and trying to get the information out, I saw the same two board members time and time again. If you're truly going to work as a committee and work as 9 board members and you're all on the same page with something, you all need to support each other, and you need to support us as the community, because we don't know any different. Okay, so thank you for all that you do. Good luck to the new board members. You have many adventures, obviously. Good night.
Thank you.
Yoni Yaris, 422 Cherry Hill Boulevard. One, I'm going to play off something that Mr. Short raised. I think it's time. I'm now a member of the board of directors at my synagogue. I also serve on the security committee. I think it's time to launch a security committee involving parents' interest. It's come up time and time again. Before I moved back to town, I watched it from afar. I think it's time to bring parents in, let them know what the history is, let them know that we've had police officers in the schools since, I believe, the 80s. Well ahead of Columbine, which is heading on its 20th anniversary this year. I want to say Cherry Hill has been a leader in terms of school safety in that regard, of having a director of security starting in the 90s. I think 4 or 5 years before Columbine took place. The information needs to get out. Going back to the bond, I am concerned with the January 2020 date. We saw 3 new board members elected this year. They will have to abstain if it happens again where we have 3 new board members come on when this goes to the state. I believe it needs to get pushed back to November, December in order for that to work, because you're going to have the issue of potentially new board members coming on who should abstain on all ethical reasons on anything that took place, so they were not part of those board discussions. I'm hoping that we can finally expand the Public Information Office. What worked in the 1990s when I was a student in the district was we had Channel 18, then Channel 19. The times have changed. I don't think anyone watches Channel 18 or 19. Eastcast is gone. I don't know if the West Report still exists in any capacity. I think the news coming out of it is mainly East Side and the West Side. And I apologize, West. I don't know what your school paper is called, so I apologize for that. All right, thank you. So those are the 2 main sources. It's time to expand. If we're going to utilize social media, there needs to be more than just Barbara doing this. I worked in communication in the past. You need a team and need to learn the 21st century is here, and it needs to expand. Meet people where they're at. I don't know if having a board page is an appropriate manner, but there needs to be access and things going on. And people need to make the time. It's on us as well to engage a citizenship back with you guys. We can't just keep blaming. We have to decide it's important. I'm here at almost every meeting. You make the time and such like that. And I think that covers it. Thank you guys for everything. Mr. Goodwin, you've done an excellent job, and I'm really excited to see where you go in your leadership as well as going forward.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ben Ovadia, 100 Roanoke Road. I hope I can articulate what I want to say. I didn't prepare notes. I didn't even think I'd be here. But having watched the live stream a little bit, and then like some of the meeting, great. It was very interesting. What I want to say, though, is I think it's important to understand what it means when we talk about cutting into operations. I did hear that part. And when we talk about foregoing a November small bond of potentially let me start over. Okay. We need to figure out, if we're thinking about September 2020 or November 2020 or whatever 2020, we're talking about 2 school budgets. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think we're talking about 2 school budgets where we have to cut into the operations in order to pay for important, emergent, urgent type of stuff that was included in the bond that we said was very important, that I believe is very important. And the question is, what does that mean? I mean, in dollars and cents, in teachers and student ratios, in technology and whatever. What does it actually mean? Because I think, in part to agree with Rick, when we're thinking about setting dates, it's good to have, I think the last time I spoke at a board meeting, I said it's good to have a date to work back from. It's also important to understand, what are we talking about? Are we talking about, I guess just what are we talking about? Over 2 years, what can we possibly do? We know there's a lot of money needed. We know there will be an operational impact. And then beyond that, having the best plan, obviously, to succeed in September 2020. But I think the other thing to think about is November is seen by the community, I think, as a free time to go out to the community. It doesn't cost additional election money. I personally don't believe the amount it costs, $40,000 or $50,000, compared to the whole is that significant, but people out there do. So I just think, is there a way to think about November and a 7-week timeline in terms of something nearly everyone would accept to avoid something we know will be a huge cut in operations instead? So I just ask us to really spend some of this 7 weeks, 2 or 3 or 4 of the weeks, to see, is there something in November 19 that could possibly make sense? If not, fine. You know, if we've done the feasibility study and we've asked the people and it turns out that is not possible, then that is not possible. Okay, but let's not totally take it off the table today. The other thing I would say that is important that is emerging is fair funding. It is meeting on the 24th of this month. Again, I can't be there, but other people should be there. That's an important fight, I think, that's come up in the bond discussion as well. But we really, really were shortchanged. That's a lot of money. We can't make, there's not enough bake sales in the world, right, to make up for that. And that needs to be, I know there's talk about last year about a liaison, is there a red one? About a liaison, you know, from the board or something like that, someone who can at least observe, report, and report back. I really do think that is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. If no one else, I'm going to throw it to Dr. Malash to see if you have any comments or on any of the items before we close.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. First and foremost, I do want to recognize, and we'll talk about it again at the last meeting of the month, but January is Board Recognition Month, as established by the Department of Ed. So in order to recognize all of the board members that are currently sitting, the 9 members that are here, and the 3 board members, former board members who are currently sitting in the audience, at least board members from here in Cherry Hill, thank you for your service. Thank you for the time and the effort and for what you do. Honestly, I think one of the most important volunteer positions in our community, where you are dedicating an incredible amount of time, energy, and parts of who you are. And based on the discussions tonight, we'll be continuing to dedicate even more time as we move forward. I'm grateful for all the folks that came out. I'm grateful for the discussion that took part with the board tonight. One of the things I will always recommend to folks is if they have suggestions or thoughts, to let us know, to contact us, right? It's one of the best ways for us to directly, as a school district, take information. People contact us directly, whether it's by phone, whether it's by email, whether it's by the quick question feature that's on the website, but always a great way to share information. A lot for us to consider. I am really looking forward to the board kind of getting their collective minds wrapped around a direction. I'm eager to hear what that direction is, what the board values as a board. A lot kind of went on tonight to talk about, but I'm looking for the board to actually identify, what that is. So I'm looking forward to the ongoing discussion. I've set up meetings with some folks that had contacted me directly about the referendum. If there are folks that are out there that did not support the referendum, whether they're sitting here in the audience tonight where they had the time to come out here, I invite you to come in and to talk to us about that, because we continue to hear about things that we need to improve, we need to do better. I would love to hear, what does that mean? So we have a couple of meetings that have been set up, a couple that were canceled, a couple that are coming up this week, but I would love for people to come in and actually sit down and and sit with Lynn and I or with Justin or whomever it is and say, I wish this was included. I wish this was included. I wish this is when I said we should build a better bond, this is what I meant by a better bond would include these things and not include these things. So we are looking for folks to come in and to provide that information. It's a great way to engage in dialogue and actually have that discussion that goes forward. As always, Sonia and Julia, thank you for your input and for sharing the perspective on what's there.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. And with that, I'm going to see a move to adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Matlack and Mrs. Schultz. All in favor? All right, thanks.